The hydraulic wrench slipped from my hands and hit the concrete floor with a metallic crash that echoed across the motor pool. I didn't bend to pick it up. Neither did Corporal Martinez. We both stood there, frozen, staring at Specialist Elena Vasquez as she knelt beside the M1A2 Abrams, her hands black with grease, her uniform sleeves rolled tight above her elbows. The tank hadn't started in 11 months. 3 master mechanics had declared it beyond field repair. The requisition for scrapping sat on Colonel Hendrix's desk waiting for a signature. And in 40 minutes, a delegation of commanders from Fort Hood would arrive to inspect our maintenance capabilities, specifically to evaluate whether our battalion deserved to keep its funding for the next fiscal year. "It's the fuel pump relay," Elena said, not looking up. Her voice was steady, almost bored. "I told you yesterday." Martinez's jaw tightened. He was a good soldier, competent, respected. But in the 6 months since Elena transferred to our unit from Fort Bragg, something in him had calcified into resentment. "We replaced that relay," he said. "Twice. You replaced the wrong relay." Elena's fingers moved inside the engine compartment with the kind of certainty that made my stomach turn. Not because I thought she was wrong, because I knew with creeping dread that she might be right. And if she was right, it meant we'd been wrong. Publicly, expensively wrong, in front of everyone. I was a staff sergeant then, responsible for the motor pool, responsible for the reports that went up the chain, responsible for the decision to recommend scrapping this particular 70-ton piece of military hardware. My name was on those documents, my assessment, my judgment. "Vasquez," I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. "Step back from the tank." She didn't move. Her fingers kept working, disconnecting something I couldn't see. The morning sun was climbing over the maintenance bay, turning the desert air thick and white. Sweat ran down the back of my neck. Somewhere in the distance, a diesel engine coughed to life. The normal sounds of a Tuesday morning at Fort Irwin, California. Routine. Except nothing about this moment felt routine. "Sergeant Calhoun?" Elena said, still not looking at me. "With respect, if I step back now, this tank won't start. And when those commanders arrive and see a dead Abrams sitting in the motor pool, they're going to ask questions. Questions about why we couldn't fix it. Questions about competence." "We know why we couldn't fix it," Martinez said. "It's beyond repair." "It's beyond your repair," Elena said quietly. The silence that followed was dangerous. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, against my throat. Martinez took a step forward, his hands curling into fists, and I moved between them without thinking. This was my motor pool, my responsibility, my disaster unfolding in real time. "Everyone calm down," I said. The words felt hollow. "Vasquez, I need you to explain exactly what you think you're doing." For the first time, she looked up at me. Her face was angular, dark-eyed, expressionless in the way that young soldiers learn when they've been doubted too many times to waste energy on emotion. 23 years old, 2 deployments already under her belt, and a technical aptitude that should have earned respect, but instead seemed to breed suspicion. I'd read her file. Top of her class in advanced mechanized systems. Multiple commendations, transferred to our unit under circumstances that were never quite explained. "The fuel system has a secondary relay," she said, speaking slowly as if to a child. "It's not in the manual because it was a field modification done on tanks refurbished after 2019. Someone installed it incorrectly on this one, probably during depot maintenance. It's been sending intermittent signals that corrupted the engine control unit. Every time you tried to start it, you were essentially frying the system further. I've bypassed the faulty relay and reset the ECU. The tank will start." Martinez laughed. It was an ugly sound. "That's insane. You're making things up." "Am I?" Elena stood, wiping her hands on a rag that was already black with oil. "There's one way to find out." I should have stopped her. I should have ordered her to step away, filed a report, followed protocol. Instead, I stood there like a statue while she climbed onto the tank's deck, disappeared into the commander's hatch, and reappeared a moment later in the driver's position. Through the open hatch, I could see her settle into the seat, her hands moving over controls that had been dead for almost a year. "Don't!" I said, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. Elena hit the ignition. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The motor pool held its breath. Martinez's face was flushed with vindication. I felt something like relief begin to form in my chest. Relief that she was wrong, that the world made sense, that the established order would hold. Then the turbine engine caught. The sound started as a low whine, rising quickly into the distinctive howl of an Abrams coming to life. 63 tons of American armor shuddering awake after 11 months of silence. The noise was overwhelming, beautiful, terrible. Black smoke coughed from the exhaust. The entire tank vibrated as the engine found its rhythm, settled into an idle that sounded impossibly clean. Elena kept the engine running for exactly 30 seconds, then shut it down. The sudden silence felt like falling. She climbed out of the driver's hatch, jumped down from the deck and stood in front of me. Her face was still expressionless, but something burned behind her eyes. Not triumph. Something sadder than that. Something like exhaustion. "It'll need a full diagnostic," she said, "and the relay should be replaced properly, not just bypassed. But it runs. It was never scrap." Martinez had gone pale. Other soldiers were emerging from the maintenance bays, drawn by the sound of the Abrams starting. Word would spread fast. By lunch, everyone would know. By dinner, it would reach the officers. And in 35 minutes, the commanders would arrive. And I would have to explain how a specialist had fixed a tank that 3 master mechanics had condemned. "How did you know?" I asked. My voice sounded distant, not quite my own. Elena looked at me for a long moment. "Because I read the modification logs," she said, "and because I don't assume I know everything." She walked away before I could respond, heading toward the wash station, leaving me standing next to a tank that shouldn't have been running, holding a maintenance report that was now a lie, facing a choice I hadn't asked for and wasn't ready to make. The worst part was knowing she was right, about the tank, about the relay, about all of it. The second worst part was realizing I'd spent 6 months doubting her for reasons that had nothing to do with her competence. Martinez wouldn't look at me. The other soldiers were whispering, watching, waiting to see what I would do. In the distance, I heard the sound of vehicles approaching. The commanders arriving early. Of course they were arriving early. This was the army. Nothing ever happened the way you expected. I picked up the hydraulic wrench from where I dropped it. The metal was warm from the sun. My hands were shaking. Everything was about to change. The heat was what I remembered most about that first day Elena arrived. August in the Mojave Desert, temperatures pushing 110 by noon, the kind of dry heat that made your skin feel like paper. She stepped off the transport truck with a duffel bag over her shoulder and a flat expression that I would come to know well. No excitement, no anxiety, just a young woman reporting for duty, looking at the motor pool like she was cataloguing every flaw, every inefficiency, every corner that had been cut. I was the one who processed her paperwork. Staff Sergeant David Calhoun, 34 years old, 12 years in the Army, comfortable in my role as the man who kept things running smoothly. I'd built a reputation for reliability. Maintenance reports filed on time, equipment functional, no drama. The kind of NCO that officers appreciated because I made their jobs easier. Specialist Vasquez, I said, not looking up from her transfer documents. "Welcome to Fort Irwin." "Thank you, Sergeant." Her voice was flat, professional. I glanced up and saw her standing at ease, regulation perfect, eyes forward. Pretty, I suppose, though I tried not to think in those terms. Mixed heritage, Latino father, white mother, according to her file. Grew up in El Paso, enlisted at 18. 2 deployments to Iraq during the drawdown. Assigned to maintenance companies both times. Exemplary record. So why was she being transferred to a training base in the middle of the California desert? Says here you specialized in heavy armor at Fort Bragg, I said, scanning the documents. We don't see a lot of that here. Mostly we get logistics specialists, supply corps, people coasting toward retirement. I'm not coasting, Sergeant. The way she said it made me look up again. There was no defiance in her face, no attitude, just a statement of fact. I felt the first whisper of unease. Soldiers with records this good didn't get transferred to Fort Irwin unless something had happened. A conflict with a superior officer, a relationship gone wrong, something that required distance and discretion. Well, I said, trying to sound welcoming, we're glad to have you. The motor pool can always use capable hands. Corporal Martinez will show you around, get you settled in the barracks. Martinez appeared on cue, all efficiency and crisp salutes. He was 28, stocky, confident in the way that comes from being good at your job and knowing it. We'd worked together for 3 years. He knew the motor pool as well as I did, knew how to diagnose problems by sound, knew which equipment to baby and which could take abuse. Specialist, he said, nodding to Elena. Follow me. I watched them walk away across the burning concrete and told myself that my unease was just caution. New personnel always disrupted the rhythm. It took time to integrate someone, to learn their quirks and capabilities. This would be fine. Everything would be fine. I was wrong, of course, but I wouldn't understand just how wrong for several more months. The problem started small. Elena didn't socialize. She ate in the dining facility alone, reading technical manuals instead of joining the usual conversations. She didn't drink with the other soldiers on Friday nights. She didn't complain, didn't gossip, didn't participate in the informal networks that made military life bearable. She just worked, and her work was unnervingly good. The first time I saw it was a week after her arrival. A Humvee had come in with electrical problems, lights flickering, radio cutting out, the kind of intermittent issue that could take days to trace. I assigned it to Martinez, standard procedure. 3 days later, it was still sitting in the bay, partially disassembled, Martinez growing increasingly frustrated. Elena walked past it one afternoon, paused, looked at the exposed wiring for maybe 30 seconds, then kept walking. I didn't think anything of it until she returned 15 minutes later with a voltage meter and a wiring diagram. "May I?" she asked Martinez. He shrugged, clearly annoyed but trying to hide it. "Sure, take a look." She didn't take a look. She went directly to a specific junction box, tested 2 connections, then replaced a single ground wire that had been installed incorrectly. The entire repair took 8 minutes. When Martinez turned the ignition, every system came to life perfectly. "How did you—" he started. "The ground wire was reversed," Elena said, already walking away. "Creates a feedback loop, shows up as intermittent problems because it's temperature dependent." Martinez stared after her, his face going through several expressions before settling on something between embarrassment and anger. I felt it too. That sting of being shown up, of being revealed as less competent than you believed yourself to be. "Lucky guess," Martinez muttered. But it wasn't luck. It happened again with a generator, again with a transport truck, again with equipment that seasoned mechanics had struggled with, problems that Elena seemed to diagnose with an ease that bordered on supernatural. Except it wasn't supernatural. It was knowledge, pattern recognition, the kind of technical mastery that comes from hundreds of hours of study and practice. The soldiers started bringing her their problems. Not officially, I was still the motor pool sergeant. Martinez was still the senior specialist. But quietly, in the margins, soldiers would ask Elena to look at things, and she would fix them, almost always, with a speed and certainty that made the rest of us look slow and uncertain by comparison. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt threatened. It was Sergeant First Class Morrison who put words to what I was feeling. We were having coffee in the NCO break room 2 weeks into September, and he'd seen me watching Elena work on a Bradley fighting vehicle, her movements precise and economical. "She's making you nervous," Morrison said. He was 46, a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, with the kind of blunt honesty that came from seeing too much to care about politeness. "I'm not nervous," I said. "Bullshit." Morrison smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're thinking about what it means. A 23-year-old specialist who's better at your job than you are. What that says about you, what that means for your career. That's not... It's exactly what you're thinking. And you know what? It's reasonable. The Army doesn't reward competence evenly. It rewards rank and time in service and relationships. A woman that good, that young. She's a threat to the established order. She makes people uncomfortable." I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist that I was better than that I judged soldiers on merit, that gender didn't factor into my assessments. But sitting there in that break room, staring into my coffee, I couldn't lie to myself. Elena made me uncomfortable, not because she was a woman. I'd served with plenty of competent women, but because she was better than me at the thing I'd built my identity around, because her presence exposed the truth that I was good enough but not exceptional, reliable but not brilliant. And in a military that was increasingly lean and competitive, good enough might not be enough anymore. "What was she doing at Bragg?" I asked Morrison. He shrugged. "Heard she had a conflict with her platoon sergeant. He took credit for some maintenance procedure she developed, submitted it up the chain as his own work. She called him out on it. Didn't go well for her. Jesus, yeah. So they transferred her here, punishment disguised as routine reassignment, the Army's favorite move." Morrison drained his coffee. "My advice, either find a way to work with her or find a way to get rid of her, because she's not going to get worse at her job, and you're not going to get less insecure about it. Something's got to give." He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing and acting are different things. I chose the coward's path. I kept Eleanor at arm's length. I gave her assignments, but never the high-profile ones. I wrote adequate performance reviews, but not glowing ones. I never actively undermined her, but I never championed her either. I let Martinez's resentment fester unchecked. I allowed the subtle exclusion to continue. And when the Abrams tank came in with engine problems in October, I didn't assign it to her. I didn't even consult her. I worked on it with Martinez and Master Sergeant Powell, 3 experienced NCOs attacking the problem with methodical competence. We ran diagnostics. We replaced parts. We followed the technical manuals exactly, and the tank stayed dead. By December, we'd logged over 200 hours of work on it. The battalion maintenance officer was getting impatient. The tank was taking up bay space, consuming resources, becoming a visible symbol of failure. In January, I made the recommendation to scrap it. The paperwork went up the chain. Everyone agreed. It was the sensible decision. Elena never said a word about it, never offered an opinion, never pushed to be involved. She just watched, those dark eyes taking in everything, judging nothing out loud. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was making reasonable decisions based on experience and rank structure. I told myself that Elena's silence meant acceptance. I was lying to myself about everything. By March, the scrapping approval was almost complete, just waiting for the colonel's signature. Just waiting for the quarterly inspection, when commanders from Fort Hood would review our maintenance capabilities and rubber-stamp the decision. And then, on a Monday morning in late April, Elena submitted a maintenance request, formal by the book, requesting permission to perform diagnostic work on the condemned Abrams. I denied it without a second thought. She submitted it again on Tuesday. I denied it again. On Wednesday, she requested a meeting with me. I made her wait until Friday afternoon, a petty exercise of power that I immediately regretted but didn't retract. When she finally sat across from my desk in the maintenance office, her face was carefully neutral. "Sergeant Calhoun, I'd like to understand your reasoning for denying my diagnostic request. The tank has been thoroughly evaluated," I said. "Multiple senior mechanics have concluded it's beyond field repair. Continuing to invest time in it is wasteful." "With respect, Sergeant, I've reviewed the maintenance logs. I don't believe the diagnosis is complete." "Your belief isn't relevant, Specialist. The decision has been made." She looked at me for a long moment. "Is this about the tank, Sergeant, or is this about something else?" The question hung in the air between us, sharp and dangerous. I should have dismissed it, should have pulled rank, ended the conversation. Instead, I met her eyes and saw something there that made my stomach turn. Not anger, disappointment. Like she'd expected better from me and was mourning the fact that I'd failed to deliver. "You're dismissed, Specialist." She stood, saluted, and left without another word. That weekend, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that look in her eyes, kept replaying every interaction, every decision, every moment I'd chosen comfort over truth, kept seeing the kind of man I'd become without noticing, someone who protected his position rather than pursuing excellence, someone who let fear make his decisions. On Monday morning, I went to find Elena. She was in the wash bay, cleaning tools with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. "The diagnostic request," I said without preamble. "Approved. You have until the inspection on Tuesday. If the tank isn't running by then, we proceed with scrapping. Clear?" She looked up at me, searching my face for something. Whatever she found, it must have been enough. "Clear, Sergeant. Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just prove me wrong." A faint smile crossed her face. "I intend to, Sergeant." I walked away before I could change my mind, already regretting the decision, already imagining how it would look when she failed, when I would have to explain why I'd wasted resources on a last-minute diagnostic attempt. I never imagined she would succeed. I never imagined that in less than 24 hours she would make me confront everything I'd refused to see about myself. The commander's vehicles pulled into the motor pool at exactly 0900 hours. 2 Humvees, black and official, carrying Colonel Hendricks from our battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen from Fort Hood's Maintenance Division, and Major Robert Knowles, the Inspector General's representative. They stepped out into the bright morning sun, all crisp uniforms and polished insignia, carrying tablets and clipboards, ready to evaluate whether our battalion was efficiently managing its equipment budget, ready to decide whether we deserved continued funding or whether resources should be reallocated to more competent units. I stood at attention with Martinez and Master Sergeant Powell, forming the receiving line. Behind us, the motor pools stretched out in organized rows, Humvees, trucks, generators and maintenance bays, and there, impossible to miss, the M1A2 Abrams tank that had been dead for 11 months and was now inexplicably functional. Colonel Hendricks noticed it immediately. He was 52 career armor officer, a man who'd spent 30 years around tanks and could spot anomalies like a hawk spotting prey. "Sergeant Calhoun," he said, his voice carrying the particular neutrality that senior officers used when they were about to ask uncomfortable questions. "That's the Abrams we recommended for scrapping, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Is it running?" The question was simple. The answer was complicated. I could feel Martinez's tension beside me, could feel Powell's confusion. They didn't know about my conversation with Elena, didn't know I'd approved her diagnostic request. As far as they knew, the tank was still condemned, still waiting for final paperwork. "Yes, sir," I said. "It was restarted yesterday." Lieutenant Colonel Chen stepped forward. She was 41, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made junior officers nervous and the reputation for not tolerating inefficiency. Yesterday, after months of failed repair attempts, that's quite a coincidence, Sergeant, given that we're conducting our inspection today. The implication was clear. We'd staged something. Made the tank run temporarily, cosmetically, to avoid looking incompetent during the inspection. It was a reasonable suspicion. It was also completely wrong. Ma'am, the tank was properly diagnosed and repaired. I said, it's fully functional. By whom? Major Knowles asked. He was younger than the others, maybe 35, with the skeptical expression of someone who'd built a career on catching people in mistakes. This was the moment, the inflection point where I could either protect my own reputation or tell the truth. I could claim credit for the repair, or at least spread it among the senior NCOs. I could make it sound like a team effort, like veteran experience had finally cracked the problem. I could preserve the hierarchy, the comfortable fiction that rank and experience correlated perfectly with competence. Or I could tell the truth. I looked at Elena. She was standing with the other junior enlisted at ease, her face unreadable. She wasn't looking at me, wasn't expecting anything. She'd done her job. What happened next was my decision, my test, my chance to be better than I'd been. Specialist Elena Vasquez diagnosed and repaired the tank, sir, I said. She identified a field modification relay that was installed incorrectly during depot maintenance. The fault wasn't in our previous diagnostics, it was in the documentation. We were looking for problems that the manuals said should exist, not problems that actually did exist. The silence that followed felt like judgment. Colonel Hendricks looked at me, then at Elena, then back at me. A specialist, he said slowly, fixed a tank that 3 master mechanics couldn't fix. Yes, sir. In how much time? I swallowed. Approximately 4 hours of diagnostic work, sir. The actual repair took less than 30 minutes. Martinez made a sound somewhere between a cough and a strangled protest. Powell was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. But Colonel Hendricks's expression was changing, shifting from skepticism to something harder to read. "Specialist Vasquez," he called out, "front and center." Elena moved forward with the same economy of motion she brought to everything. She stood before the 3 senior officers, saluted crisply, and waited. "Explain the problem you found," Colonel Hendricks said. Elena didn't hesitate. Her voice was clear, technical, precise. "Sir, the tank underwent depot-level maintenance in 2019, where a secondary fuel relay was installed as part of a fuel efficiency modification. The modification was documented in a technical bulletin, but not incorporated into the standard maintenance manual. During installation, the relay's ground and signal wires were reversed. This created an intermittent feedback loop that corrupted the engine control unit's startup sequence. Each attempted start, without addressing the relay further, degraded the ECU's programming. The previous mechanics were following correct procedures based on available documentation. They had no reason to suspect a modification that wasn't in their manuals. Lieutenant Colonel Chen was taking notes on her tablet. "And you knew about this modification how?" "I read the technical bulletins, ma'am, all of them, including the archived ones from depot maintenance facilities." "All of them," Chen repeated. "Do you know how many technical bulletins exist for the M1A2 platform?" 3,247, ma'am, as of last month. The number hung in the air like a detonation. Major Knowles actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of surprise. "You've read over 3,000 technical bulletins?" "Yes, sir. It's part of my personal study program." "Jesus Christ," Knowles muttered. Colonel Hendricks was looking at Elena with an expression I couldn't quite pass. "Why didn't you bring this to Sergeant Calhoun's attention sooner, Specialist?" For the first time, Elena hesitated. It was barely perceptible, just a fractional pause before she answered. I did submit a maintenance request, sir. It was initially denied. All three officers turned to look at me. I felt my face burning. Why? Chen asked me directly. I could have made excuses, could have talked about resource allocation, about priorities, about the reasonable skepticism of questioning established assessments. All of it would have been technically true and fundamentally dishonest. Because I didn't trust her judgment over my own, Mom, I said. Because she's a junior enlisted and I'm a senior NCO, and I assumed experience trumped knowledge. I was wrong. The admission felt like falling, like stepping off a cliff with no idea if there was ground below or just endless descent. Martinez was looking at me like I'd betrayed him. Powell's face was carefully blank, but Colonel Hendricks nodded, just once, a minimal gesture that might have been respect. "Let's see this tank run," he said. We walked to the Abrams, a small procession of officers and NCOs, and one specialist who'd made us all look like fools. Elena climbed into the driver's position without being asked. The officers positioned themselves at a safe distance. I stood close enough to see everything, close enough to watch my entire self-conception disintegrate if this went wrong. Elena ran through the startup sequence. The turbine engine caught on the first try, rising from silence to that distinctive howl in seconds. She let it run for a full minute, then powered it down. The silence afterward felt heavy with meaning. "Diagnostic readouts," Lieutenant Colonel Chen said, holding out her hand. Elena produced them from a pocket. She'd known this would happen, had prepared, had thought 3 steps ahead, while the rest of us were still reacting. Chen studied the data, scrolling through screen after screen of technical information, her face growing more impressed with each passing second. "These are clean," she said finally. "Better than clean. This tank is operating at optimal efficiency, higher than before the malfunction, actually. Nay, she optimized the timing on the fuel injection while she was in there," I said quietly. It was something I'd noticed in her notes, a detail she hadn't mentioned, an improvement she'd made simply because she could. Colonel Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried across the motor pool. "Specialist Vasquez, I'm putting you in for a commendation, and I'm recommending you for promotion, ahead of the standard timeline. This kind of technical expertise is exactly what the Army needs." "Thank you, sir," Elena said. Her voice remained neutral, professional, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or just the exhaustion of finally being seen. "Sergeant Calhoun," Hendricks turned to me, "I want a full report on my desk by Monday. Documentation of the repair, analysis of how the original diagnosis failed, and recommendations for updating our diagnostic protocols. This can't happen again." "Yes, sir." The inspection continued for another 3 hours. They looked at our other equipment, reviewed our maintenance logs, asked questions that ranged from routine to invasive. Through it all, I felt like I was moving through water, every action delayed, every thought struggling through the weight of what had just happened. Eleanor had proven herself. In the most public way possible, in front of the people who mattered, she had demonstrated that competence didn't correlate with rank or experience or any of the comfortable assumptions we'd built our hierarchy on. She had been better than us, and now everyone knew it, and I had admitted it, had chosen truth over comfort, had acknowledged my own failure in front of the very people whose respect I'd spent years cultivating. The question now was what came next. After the officers left, after the formal inspection concluded and the Humvees drove away toward battalion headquarters, the motor pool felt different. The other soldiers were watching me, watching Elena, trying to understand what the dynamics would be now that everything had shifted. Martinez approached me first. His face was flushed, his jaw tight with something that might have been anger or might have been shame. "You threw us under the bus," he said, keeping his voice low. "You made us look incompetent in front of the brass." "We were incompetent," I said. "With this specific problem, that's not an insult, Martinez, it's a fact. So you sided with her over your own NCOs, over people you've worked with for years." "I sided with the truth. There's a difference." He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "This is going to change things. You know that, right? The guys who've been here for years, who've built relationships, who've earned their positions, they're not going to be happy about getting shown up by a specialist who's been here 6 months. Then maybe they should read more technical bulletins," I said. Martinez walked away without responding. I watched him go, knowing he was right about one thing. This was going to change things. The comfortable equilibrium of the motor pool, the unspoken hierarchies and assumptions, all of it was cracking, and I had chosen to swing the hammer. Elena found me an hour later in my office, staring at the maintenance report I needed to write. She stood in the doorway, not quite at attention, but not relaxed either. "Sergeant Calhoun," she said, "thank you for telling the truth up there. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," I said. "I should have done it months ago. Should have listened when you first raised concerns about the tank. Should have made space for you in this unit instead of seeing you as a threat." She studied me for a moment. "You thought I was a threat?" "I thought you made me look inadequate, which isn't the same thing, but it felt like it at the time. And now I think you're the most technically competent mechanic I've ever worked with, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to admit it." She nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something, Sergeant?" "Yeah." "When you denied my diagnostic request the first 2 times, was it about the tank, or was it about me being a woman?" The question hit like a physical blow. I wanted to deny it immediately, wanted to insist that gender had nothing to do with my decisions. But sitting there in that office, under her steady gaze, I couldn't lie. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've been trying to figure that out. I don't think I woke up any morning deciding to discriminate against you. But I also can't say for certain that your gender didn't factor into my assumptions about your competence. The bias might have been unconscious, but that doesn't make it less real." "At least you're honest about the uncertainty," Elena said. "Most people would just deny it outright. Being honest is the least I can do at this point." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "For what it's worth, Sergeant, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a person who made bad decisions because of things you didn't examine closely enough. That's different, and it's fixable." "Is it?" "I hope so, because if people can't change, we're all screwed." She left before I could respond, leaving me alone with my computer and my thoughts and the knowledge that she was right. Change was possible. The question was whether I had the courage to actually go through with it. The report took me all weekend to write. Not because the technical details were difficult. Elena had provided clear documentation of everything she'd done. But because I kept trying to find ways to soften the truth, to spread blame more evenly, to protect the reputations of the people I'd worked with for years. Every time I tried, I heard Elena's voice. "I don't assume I know everything." In the end, I wrote it straight. I documented our failed diagnostic attempts, explained exactly where our process had broken down, and credited Elena by name for the solution. I included recommendations for updating training protocols, for incorporating technical bulletin reviews into regular practice, for creating systems that would catch field modifications that weren't in standard manuals. I submitted it Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I was called to Colonel Hendricks's office. He was alone when I arrived, sitting behind his desk with my report open on his tablet. He gestured for me to sit, then studied me for a long moment before speaking. "This is a good report, Sergeant. Thorough, honest, actionable. It's also a professional self-immolation. Sir, you just documented your own failure in excruciating detail and distributed it to everyone in the chain of command. You realize that, right?" "Yes, sir. Why?" I thought about how to answer. Thought about Elena's eyes when she'd asked if it was about the tank or about something else. Thought about the kind of leader I wanted to be versus the kind I'd been. Because it was the truth, sir. And because if I'm going to hold other soldiers accountable, I need to be willing to hold myself to the same standard. Hendricks leaned back in his chair. You know what the easy thing would have been? Take credit for Elena's work. Tell the inspectors that you guided her to the solution. That it was a team effort, that senior NCO leadership made it possible. Preserve the hierarchy. Keep everyone comfortable. Yes, sir. That would have been easier. But you didn't do it. You threw yourself on a grenade for a specialist you've barely worked with, who you've been actively undermining for 6 months. The words stung because they were true. I made mistakes, sir. A lot of them. The only thing I can control now is how I respond to those mistakes. Hendricks was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I've been in the army for 30 years, Calhoun. I've seen a lot of leaders. Most of them are competent. Some are exceptional. But the ones I remember, the ones who actually made a difference, they were the ones who were willing to admit when they were wrong, who chose integrity over comfort. You did that last week, in front of people who could hurt your career. That takes a particular kind of courage. I don't feel courageous, sir. I feel like I spent 6 months being a coward and finally stopped. That's what courage is. It's not the absence of fear or weakness. It's choosing to do the right thing despite them. He closed his tablet. I'm approving your recommendations. We're going to overhaul our diagnostic training, incorporate technical bulletin reviews, and create a system for capturing field modifications. I'm also reassigning Specialist Vasquez. My stomach dropped. Sir, if this is about... She's being promoted to sergeant and transferred to the battalion maintenance office. She'll be developing new training protocols and serving as our technical specialist for complex repairs. It's a significant step up in responsibility and visibility. I sat back, processing. She deserves it. She does. But here's the thing, Calhoun. She also deserves to work in an environment where her competence is recognized and valued. Can you provide that in your motor pool? The question hung between us. Hendricks wasn't asking if I was a good person. He was asking if I was capable of change, capable of creating a culture that valued merit over seniority, truth over comfort. I can, sir, I said. Or at least I'm committed to trying. But I understand if Specialist Vasquez would prefer a fresh start somewhere else. I've already spoken with her. She's excited about the new position, but she also said something interesting. She said, you're the first senior NCO who's ever apologized to her for making assumptions based on her gender. The first one who admitted uncertainty about his own biases instead of just denying them. She thinks that matters. It should matter, sir, but it doesn't erase 6 months of making her professional life harder than it needed to be. No, it doesn't. But it's a start. Hendricks stood, signaling the end of the meeting. The army is changing, Sergeant. Slowly, imperfectly, but changing. We're getting more diverse, more technically specialized, more dependent on people who don't fit traditional molds. Leaders who can adapt to that change are valuable. Leaders who can't will get left behind. Which one are you going to be? I'm going to try to be the first one, sir. Good. Dismissed. I walked out of his office feeling like I'd been through a battle, exhausted, bruised, but also strangely hopeful. Change was possible. The question was whether I could sustain it. The motor pool was different after that. Martinez remained distant, professional but cool, working through his own process of accepting what had happened. Some of the other soldiers followed his lead. But others, younger ones mostly, ones who'd watched Elena work and recognized her competence, started asking her questions more openly, started bringing problems to her without apology. The week before she transferred to the battalion office, Elena organized a training session on technical bulletin research. 20 soldiers attended, including me. She was a natural teacher, clear, patient, willing to explain complex concepts in multiple ways until people understood. I watched soldiers who'd been skeptical of her transform into students, taking notes, asking questions, genuinely engaged in learning from someone who knew more than they did. Afterward, I asked her how she'd developed such extensive technical knowledge. "I was scared," she said simply. "My first deployment, I was the only woman in my maintenance company. I knew I'd be judged more harshly, that my mistakes would be magnified and my successes minimized. So I decided to be so good that it didn't matter. I studied constantly. I read everything I could find. I asked questions until people got tired of answering them. Not because I loved it, but because I needed it. It was armor." "That shouldn't have been necessary," I said. "No, but it was reality, still is in a lot of places." "I'm sorry I made this one of those places." She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled, really smiled, not just a professional acknowledgement. "You stopped, though. That counts for something." On her last day in the motor pool, the soldiers threw her a small celebration. Nothing fancy. Pizza in the break room, a card everyone signed, some awkward speeches. Martinez didn't attend, but most of the others did. They gave her a plaque, engraved with the Abrams tank's serial number and the date she'd restarted it. For technical excellence and persistence in the face of skepticism, it read. Elena held it like it was made of something precious. "Thank you," she said quietly. "All of you. This has been complicated, but it's also been important. You're a good unit. You're going to be better." I walked her to her car after the celebration. She'd packed her gear that morning, ready to move to battalion headquarters. We stood in the parking lot as the sun set over the desert, turning everything gold and red. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Sure, Sergeant." "Do you forgive me for the months of making things harder than they needed to be?" She thought about it for a moment. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right frame. You made mistakes. You acknowledged them. You're trying to do better. That's what matters. Forgiveness implies some kind of debt that needs to be erased. But I don't think you owe me forgiveness. I think you owe yourself the commitment to keep growing. That's more generous than I deserve." "Maybe, but I'm tired of keeping score. The world does enough of that already." She got in her car, and I watched her drive away, heading toward battalion headquarters and new responsibilities and a future that would be shaped by her competence rather than other people's assumptions. I went back to the motor pool. Martinez was still there, working late on a generator that had been giving us problems. He looked up when I entered, his face carefully neutral. "Thought you'd gone home," he said. "Not yet. Wanted to check on that generator." "It's fine. Just needs a new voltage regulator." We worked in silence for a while, the comfortable quiet of people who'd spent years working side by side. Finally, Martinez said, "I've been thinking about what happened with the tank, with Vasquez." "Yeah, I was wrong about her. About a lot of things." He didn't look at me, kept his eyes on the generator. I let my ego get in the way of recognizing someone who was better at the job. "That's on me." "It's on both of us," I said. "On all of us, really. We built a culture that valued seniority over competence. That's not her fault. It's ours. So what do we do about it? We change. We listen more. We assume less. We judge people by what they can do, not by what we expect them to be able to do." Martinez nodded slowly. "Sounds simple when you say it like that." It's not simple at all, but it's necessary. We finished the generator together, testing it until the readings were clean. Before we left, Martinez said, "Hey, Calhoun, thanks for not letting me stay wrong. About Vasquez, about all of it. That took guts. So did admitting you were wrong. That took guts, too." We locked up the motor pool and walked to our cars through the cool desert night. The next day would bring new challenges, new equipment failures, new opportunities to be better or worse versions of ourselves. The future was uncertain, messy, full of the complexity that comes from trying to change established patterns. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. 6 months later, I was promoted to Sergeant First Class. The promotion ceremony was brief, professional, attended by soldiers who'd worked with me long enough to have complicated opinions about my leadership. Colonel Hendricks pinned the new rank on my uniform and said, "Don't waste it." I knew what he meant. Elena's training protocols had been adopted across the battalion, and diagnostic success rates had improved significantly. But the real change was subtler, harder to quantify. Junior soldiers were asking more questions. Senior NCOs were admitting uncertainty more readily. The culture was shifting, slowly, imperfectly, but shifting nonetheless. The Abrams tank she'd repaired was still running flawlessly, used now for training demonstrations, a reminder that assumptions aren't the same as truth. Someone had stenciled Vasquez's victory on the turret in small letters. It violated regulation, but no one had ordered it removed. I saw Elena occasionally at battalion functions or when complex maintenance issues required her expertise. She was thriving in her new role, developing a reputation that extended beyond our base. Officers from other units would request her consultation. Young soldiers would ask for her autograph on their technical manuals, half joking, half serious. Word was she'd been recommended for warrant officer school, the track for technical specialists who wanted to remain hands-on rather than moving into pure leadership roles. When I heard that, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride, certainly, but also something like grief for the months I'd wasted not recognizing what was obvious. We were cordial, professional, occasionally friendly. The history between us was complicated. We both knew it, both accepted it, both chose to move forward rather than dwelling in what had been. But then came the incident with Private Jackson. He was 19, fresh out of advanced individual training, assigned to the motor pool with enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. Good kid, hard worker, but prone to the kind of confidence that came from not yet knowing how much he didn't know. He reminded me of myself at that age, certain, capable, and completely unaware of his own limitations. 3 weeks after I made Sergeant First Class, Jackson was assigned to diagnose problems with a Stryker armored vehicle. The 8-wheeled beast had been showing intermittent power issues, and I'd given Jackson the job as a learning opportunity, with Martinez supervising. 2 days into the work, Jackson came to my office. His face was flushed with the particular combination of excitement and defensiveness that meant he was about to say something he believed strongly but wasn't quite ready to defend. "Sergeant Calhoun, I've figured out the Stryker problem." "Good. What is it?" "The main power distribution unit is failing. We need to replace it. It's a 3-day job, but it'll fix everything." I pulled up the diagnostic logs on my computer. Jackson had run the standard tests, followed the manual procedures, arrived at a conclusion that was technically possible but felt wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. "Walk me through your reasoning," I said. He did, enthusiastically, citing test results and manual procedures with the kind of by-the-book certainty that made me uncomfortable. Not because he was wrong, exactly, but because he sounded so sure. "What does Corporal Martinez think?" I asked. "He agrees with me, said we should order the part and get started." I should have approved it. The diagnosis was plausible, the procedures were correct, and both Jackson and Martinez believed in their assessment. 6 months earlier, I would have signed off without hesitation. But something Eleanor had said kept echoing in my head. "I don't assume I know everything." "Hold off on ordering the part," I said. "I want a second opinion." Jackson's face fell. "From who, Sergeant?" "Sergeant Vasquez." The change in his expression was immediate. Not quite resentment, but close. With respect, Sergeant, we've already diagnosed the problem. We don't need... I'm not questioning your competence, Jackson. I'm following best practices for complex systems. When we're about to commit significant resources to a repair, we verify. That's standard procedure now. It wasn't exactly, but it should have been. That was one of the things I'd learned. Sometimes you had to create the standards you wished existed. Jackson left my office radiating frustration. I called Elena and explained the situation, trying to keep my voice neutral, professional, not revealing that I was second-guessing my own soldiers based on a feeling I couldn't quite name. She arrived that afternoon, wearing the new sergeant stripes on her uniform, carrying a diagnostic kit that looked like it had been assembled from 3 different manuals and personal experience. Jackson and Martinez watched from a distance as she examined the striker, their body language radiating skepticism. Elena worked for 40 minutes without speaking, running tests that weren't in the standard manual, checking connections that most mechanics would ignore. I watched her work with the same methodical precision I'd seen when she diagnosed the Abrams. No wasted motion, no assumptions. Finally, she stood up, wiping her hands on a rag. "It's not the power distribution unit," she said. Jackson stepped forward, his face flushed. "Sergeant, I ran all the tests." "You ran the standard tests, which are designed for common problems. This isn't a common problem." Eleanor pulled out her tablet and showed us a wiring diagram. "There's a ground fault in the auxiliary power system. It's creating feedback that mimics a failing PDU. If you replace the PDU without fixing the ground fault, the new unit will fail within a week. Then you'll be out the cost of the part and the labor, and you'll still have a broken striker." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jackson looked like he'd been slapped. Martinez's face was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. They'd been wrong. Again and again, Elena had been right. "How much to fix the ground fault?" I asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. I can show you where it is." "Show Private Jackson. It's his vehicle." Elena looked at me, understanding passing between us. This wasn't just about fixing the striker. It was about teaching Jackson something more important than technical procedures. "Of course, Sergeant." I watched Elena and Jackson work together for the next 3 hours. At first, Jackson was defensive, sullen, asking questions with an edge that bordered on insubordination. But Eleanor was patient, explaining not just what to do, but why, showing him how to recognize patterns that weren't in the manuals, teaching him to question his own certainty. By the end, Jackson was asking genuine questions, taking notes, looking at Elena with something that might have been the beginning of respect. After the repair was complete and the striker was running perfectly, Jackson found me in my office. "Sergeant Calhoun, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For being angry when you called Sergeant Vasquez, for thinking you didn't trust my work." He paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. "I was so sure I was right, and I was completely wrong. If we'd replaced that PDU, you would have learned an expensive lesson. That's why we verify. Sergeant Vasquez said you used to doubt her too when she first got here. The admission caught me off guard. She told you that?" "Yeah. Said you made the same mistake I almost made, assuming experience and confidence were the same as being correct. Said you figured out how to fix it, though, how to listen better." I sat back in my chair, processing this. Elena had shared our history with Jackson, not to embarrass me, but to teach him something valuable. The gesture was generous in ways I hadn't expected. "It's an easy mistake to make," I said carefully. "The military teaches us to be confident, to trust our training, to make decisions quickly. Those are good qualities, but they can also make us rigid, make us stop questioning whether we might be wrong. How do you know when to trust your judgment and when to ask for help?" It was a better question than Jackson probably realized, the kind of question that didn't have a simple answer. "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted. But here's what I've learned. If you're absolutely certain you're right, that's when you should be most willing to have someone check your work. Certainty is comfortable, it's also dangerous. Jackson nodded slowly. Sergeant Vasquez is really good at this stuff, isn't she? She's the best technical mechanic I've ever worked with, and she got that way by doing exactly what she told you to do, reading everything, questioning everything, never assuming she knows enough. After Jackson left, I sat in my office thinking about certainty and doubt, about the line between confidence and arrogance. Martinez appeared in my doorway, his expression troubled. "You doubted our diagnosis," he said without preamble. "I wanted verification. There's a difference." "Is there? Or are you saying you don't trust us anymore? That every decision we make needs to be second-guessed by Vasquez?" The question was fair, even if the tone was sharp. Martinez and I had worked together for years. We'd built a professional relationship based on mutual respect, and now that relationship was changing in ways that made us both uncomfortable. "Come in," I said. "Close the door." He did, sitting across from me with the wariness of a soldier expecting a reprimand. "I'm not questioning your competence," I said, "but I am questioning our processes. The old way of doing things, where senior people make decisions and junior people follow them, where we trust experience over verification. That way cost us 11 months on an Abrams tank. It'd almost cost us thousands of dollars on a Striker. We have to be better than that. So every time we diagnose something, we call Vasquez. No. But when we're about to commit significant resources, we verify with someone who has specialized knowledge. Sometimes that's Vasquez, sometimes it's someone else. The point is to build systems that catch mistakes before they become expensive." Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "This is about more than procedures, though, isn't it? This is about the fact that she's better at this than we are, that a 24-year-old sergeant knows more than NCOs with twice her time in service." "Yeah," I admitted, "that's part of it, and it's uncomfortable. I've spent 12 years building expertise, and she's got knowledge I'll never have because I didn't do the work she did. That's hard to accept. So, what do we do about it? We learn, we get better, we stop pretending that rank equals knowledge, and we build a motor pool where people like Vasquez can share what they know without having to fight for basic recognition." Martinez nodded slowly. "I've been an asshole to her, haven't I? We both have. We let our egos get in the way of recognizing excellence, but we can choose to be different going forward. Is it too late to fix it? I don't know, but trying is better than not trying." That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the base library and checked out technical manuals, not the basic ones I'd mastered years ago, but the advanced bulletins, the modification logs, the specialized documents that Elena had built her expertise on. I spent Saturday reading. 8 hours, taking notes, cross-referencing systems, trying to understand the depth of knowledge that Elena had accumulated. It was humbling. Every page revealed how much I didn't know, how much I'd been coasting on outdated understanding and assumed competence. By Sunday evening, my head hurt and my ego was bruised, but I also felt something like excitement. There was so much more to learn, so many systems I'd oversimplified, so many connections I'd never considered. Monday morning, I arrived at the motor pool early. Elena was already there, working on a maintenance report in the small office she'd been assigned. I knocked on her open door. "Sergeant Calhoun," she said, looking up. "Everything okay? I wanted to thank you for how you handled the situation with Jackson and the Striker. I was just doing my job. You did more than that. You taught him something important, and you did it without embarrassing him or me. That took thoughtfulness." Elena set down her pen. "Jackson reminds me of myself when I was younger. So sure I was right, so defensive when people questioned me. Someone patient taught me to question my own certainty. I'm just paying it forward." "You told him about our history, about how I doubted you. Was that wrong? I thought it might help him understand that everyone struggles with this stuff, even good leaders. The words good leaders hung in the air. I wasn't sure I deserved them, but I appreciated the generosity behind them. I spent the weekend reading technical bulletins, I said. Only made it through about 50. Got a long way to go to catch up to your 3,000. For the first time since I'd known her, Elena laughed. Really laughed, not just a professional acknowledgement. Sergeant, you don't need to read 3,000 bulletins. That was my path, my armor. You've got your own strengths. You're good with people. You've learned how to admit when you're wrong. Those are harder skills than memorizing technical data. I'm not sure about that. I am. Technical knowledge can be taught. Intellectual humility. That's rare, especially in the military. We talked for another 20 minutes. The conversation ranging from technical procedures to leadership philosophy to personal experiences. It was the first real conversation we'd had, unfiltered by rank or history or the weight of past mistakes. As I left her office, I felt something shift. Not quite friendship. Our history was too complicated for that, but respect, mutual and genuine, the foundation of something that might, over time, become collaboration. The months that followed brought steady change. Jackson became one of Elena's most dedicated students, absorbing knowledge with the fervor of someone who'd learned the cost of unearned certainty. Martinez slowly thawed, asking Elena for consultation more frequently, admitting when he needed specialized knowledge. The motor pool's diagnostic success rate climbed to 93%, the highest in the battalion. Officers started pointing to our unit as an example of effective maintenance operations. Young soldiers requested transfer to work under my leadership, which was flattering and terrifying in equal measure, but the real change was internal. I'd learned to sit with uncertainty, to ask questions without feeling diminished, to see expertise in places I hadn't expected. It didn't come naturally. Old habits fought back constantly, but I kept choosing the harder path. 1 year after the Abrams incident, Elena is accepted into Warrant Officer School, earning official recognition for the expertise she had long struggled to have acknowledged. During the ceremony, the narrator publicly recognizes her impact, admitting past mistakes and crediting her with raising the battalion's standards. Afterward, Elena explains why she transferred from Fort Bragg. A senior NCO took credit for her work, and although she proved the truth, she was quietly punished and pushed out. The story clarifies her guarded nature and reinforces the narrator's realization that he once repeated similar patterns. What separates him from others, Elena notes, is that he chose to change when confronted. Their conversation becomes a reflection on leadership, discomfort, and growth. The tank becomes a metaphor for people and institutions, written off not because they're broken, but because assumptions limit how they're seen. By admitting he was wrong, the narrator learns something more valuable than being right: the courage to grow. It isn't a perfect ending, but it's real, and that sometimes is enough.